Today's story is so intense it will make you question everything you think you know about the Old West. Set against endless snowfields, silent warriors, and the brutal law of the frontier, this is where death is expected, and mercy is unheard of. It started with something small, a young woman stepping out of a wagon, and a warrior who chose not to pull the trigger. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The bitter wind sliced through Verea Knox's wool traveling cloak as the wagon train jolted over another frozen rut. She pulled the heavy fabric tighter around her shoulders, though it did little to stop the Montana cold that crept deep into her bones. Through a narrow opening in the canvas, she glimpsed the endless stretch of white that had defined her world for nearly 3 weeks. It was a barren, unforgiving land, nothing like the cobbled streets and lamplit parlors of Boston she had left behind. "It won't be much longer now, miss," called Doran Pike, the lead driver, his voice nearly lost to the screaming wind. "Another 2 days," he added. "Maybe 3, if this weather holds." Verea nodded, even though he couldn't see her. 2 more days until she reached the Double Bar Ranch. 2 more days until she met Sylvan Cross, the man she was meant to marry. The man chosen to salvage her family's honor after the disgrace she had caused by loving a carpenter's apprentice named Ren Aldor. Gentle Ren, with ink-stained fingers and letters filled with quiet devotion, the ones her mother had discovered hidden beneath her mattress. The memory still burned with humiliation. Her father's fury, her mother's tears, the murmured gossip that followed her through Boston salons. "The Knox girl," they whispered behind gloved hands, "ruined by a common laborer." There had been only one solution: distance, and a respectable marriage. Corlin Knox had made that clear. Sylvan Cross needed a wife, and the Knox family needed their daughter's mistake erased. The wagon suddenly lurched to a violent stop. Verea was thrown against the wooden side as shouting erupted outside, horses screaming in panic. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she peered through a tear in the canvas. Riders. At least a dozen. They emerged from a snow-covered ridge like specters, silent and swift. Even from a distance, she knew they were neither cavalry nor ranch hands. They were Apache warriors, faces painted in red and black, rifles flashing beneath the pale winter sun. "Stay inside," Doran Pike's voice cracked with fear. "Don't make a sound." But there was no hiding now. The attack struck with brutal speed. War cries tore through the air as the warriors descended on the convoy. Verea watched in horror as arrows found flesh. Gunfire echoed across the valley. The sharp bite of powder mixed with the copper scent of blood staining the snow. She should have stayed hidden. She should have crouched in the wagon as ordered. But when she saw Jace Corwin, barely 16 and hired as a scout, tumble from his horse with an arrow buried in his shoulder, instinct crushed reason. Verea burst from the wagon, boots sinking into the drifts as she ran toward him. "No!" someone shouted. Maybe Doran, maybe another guard. But she didn't stop. Her skirts dragged through the snow. She was only steps from the boy when a shadow fell across her path. The warrior stood tall amid the chaos, his dark eyes locked onto hers, freezing her in place. His face bore the markings of war, red and black streaked across sharp cheekbones. But it was his gaze that held her. Not cruel, not savage. Calculating. Watchful. This was Tharek, though she would not learn his name until much later. For a breathless moment, time stretched thin. Her breath clouded the air. Her heart pounded beneath the stiff stays of her corset. Tharek raised his rifle slightly. Verea closed her eyes, bracing for death. It never came. When she dared to look again, his weapon had lowered. He barked a sharp command in Apache toward another warrior. An argument followed, short, heated, but Tharek's word ended it. Strong hands seized her arms. She fought, but rawhide cord cinched tight around her wrists. The battle was already dying. Around them, the guards lay scattered across the snow, their blood painting dark, abstract patterns against the white. Virea searched desperately for movement. There was none. Even Jace Corwin lay still, his young face turned toward the sky. They lifted her onto a horse. Tharek mounted behind her, one arm wrapped firmly around her waist to keep her from falling or fleeing. His grip was iron. She had never been so close to a man who was not family. Never this close to one who held her captive. Heat radiated from him through her cloak. She caught the scent of smoke, leather, and something untamed clinging to his skin. Hours later, the Apache camp came into view. A circle of lodges rose from the snow, smoke curling into the gray sky. Women and children emerged, their expressions a mix of curiosity and open hostility when they saw her. An older woman stepped forward, Orenai, her authority unmistakable. She spoke rapidly to Tharek, anger sharp in her tone. Her gesture toward Virea needed no translation. They argued. Tharek's voice remained calm. Orenai's grew fierce. At last, she spat into the snow and turned away. Tharek dismounted first, then pulled Virea down from the horse. Her legs, numb from cold and the long ride, gave way. He caught her before she fell. His hands were unexpectedly gentle, for a man who had just led an attack that left a dozen men dead. He led her to a lodge set slightly apart from the others. Inside, thick buffalo robes covered the ground, and a shallow fire pit at the center offered a blessing of warmth against the brutal cold. Tharek motioned for her to sit, then turned and left without a word. Virea Nox crouched near the fire, her bound wrists making it difficult to warm her hands. She was a prisoner. The realization settled slowly, then all at once. She was captive among the very people her Boston newspapers had labeled as savages and killers. Yet they had not killed her. That truth gnawed at her as the hours dragged on. Tharek had faced her with a rifle in his hands, and chosen mercy. Why? When darkness fell, he returned carrying a wooden bowl that steamed in the cold air. Stew, she guessed, though the meat was unfamiliar. He set it down, then drew a knife. Virea flinched instinctively, but he only sliced through the rawhide binding her wrists and gestured for her to eat. "Thank you," she whispered, uncertain whether he understood. He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he spoke. His English was rough, thick with accent, but clear. "You are worth more alive. For trade." Of course, she was a commodity, something to be exchanged for horses or supplies. The blunt practicality of it cut deeper than cruelty ever could. "The others wanted you dead," he continued, settling across the fire from her. "I said a white woman brings value, flour, medicine. So I'm to be sold," she said, bitterness slipping into her voice. "Traded," he corrected calmly. "When the snow stops, when travel is safe." Virea glanced toward the lodge opening. Snow was already falling again, heavy, thick, relentless. "And if it doesn't stop?" Tharek followed her gaze, a crease forming between his brows. "Then you wait." Outside, the wind rose, howling like something alive. Virea had seen winter storms in Boston, but nothing like this. This was nature unchained, a wall of white that would halt any journey. "You stay here," Tharek said, rising. "This is my lodge. You will be safe." "Your lodge?" Her voice lifted despite herself. "Then where will you—" "I stay with my cousin," he replied, moving towards the entrance. He paused once more. "Do not try to run. The storm will kill you faster than any warrior." Then he was gone. Viraya remained alone with the fire and her racing thoughts. She was captive in an Apache warrior's lodge, surrounded by people who had every reason to hate her kind, while a blizzard raged beyond the hides, one that would trap her here for days, perhaps longer. Her family would believe her dead. Sylvan Cross would take another bride. And she would have to endure until Theric traded her back, if he truly meant to trade her at all. She wrapped herself in one of the buffalo robes. The musky scent was strange, but not unpleasant. Through the smoke hole above, she watched snow fall thick and fast. The storm would last days, maybe weeks, and for all that time, her life rested in the hands of the man who had spared her, the warrior whose dark eyes had held something she still could not name in the moment before he lowered his rifle. The blizzard raged for 3 days before settling into a steady, merciless snowfall with no sign of breaking. Viraya had never known such complete separation from the world she came from. The lodge, once terrifying in its strangeness, became her entire universe, a warm cocoon of hide holding the killing cold at bay. Theric came twice each day, bringing food and tending the fire. Their exchanges were brief, mostly silent, yet she found herself watching him closely. He moved with a quiet control that seemed at odds with the image of a warrior she had been taught to fear. His hands were careful as he fed the flames, steady as he set her bowl down. Not the hands of a brute, not the hands Boston society would have called savage. On the 4th morning, she woke to find him already inside, adding wood to the dying fire. Early light filtered through the smoke hole, softening the war paint still marking his face. "The snow," she ventured, her voice rough from disuse. "How long will it last?" He glanced at her, surprised she had spoken. "Many days, maybe many weeks. This is angry winter." "And I stay here?" she asked. "Alone?" "Better alone," he said evenly, "than with those who want you dead." His tone was plain, but she sensed something beneath it. Protection, perhaps. That afternoon, the routine shifted when a woman entered the lodge. She appeared close to Viraya's age, her eyes kind despite the fatigue lining them. She carried clothing, Apache garments, and gestured for Viraya to change. The meaning was unmistakable. Her torn, blood-stained traveling dress marked her too clearly as an outsider. The woman introduced herself in careful English. "My name is Sile." She helped Viraya into a deerskin dress and leggings. They were warmer than anything she had worn since leaving Boston. When Sale motioned toward the entrance, inviting her outside, Viraya hesitated. "Theric?" she asked quietly. Sile's expression softened. "He says you may come," she replied. "You are safe." The camp itself was a revelation. Viraya Knox had expected. She wasn't sure what she had expected. Cruelty, perhaps. Barbarism. Instead, she found a living community. Children played in the snow, their laughter sharp and bright, a sound that needed no translation. Women worked side by side, cooking over low fires, mending hides and clothing, their conversations animated despite the bitter cold. Men tended horses and weapons, but they also carried firewood for the elders and lifted children onto their shoulders. It was a rhythm of life she had never imagined. They watched her, of course, some with suspicion, others with open hostility, a few with curiosity edged by resentment. But Sile remained close, never touching her, never crowding her, yet always there. A quiet presence, a silent shield. Gradually, Viraya understood she was being shown all of this on purpose. This was Theric's doing. The realization settled deep in her chest. He wanted her to see, to witness. And that evening, she waited for him differently. When he entered with the usual wooden bowl of stew, She was sitting upright instead of huddled near the fire. The Apache dress Sale had given her made her look less like a captive, more like something else. She couldn't name it. "Thank you," she said, gesturing to the clothing. "And for today, for letting me see." Tharek settled across from her in his usual place. "You think we are animals?" he said evenly. "All white people think this." Viraya stopped herself. Hadn't she? Hadn't Boston society spoken of native tribes as creatures to be tamed, converted, or erased? "I was wrong," she said quietly. "Were you?" His dark eyes held her, challenged her. "Your people come to our land, build, take, push us back. When we fight, we are savage," he continued. "When you kill us, you call it, what is the word, righteous." Heat rose to her cheeks, and not from the fire. "The men in that convoy weren't soldiers," she said. "They were guards, drivers, and that boy, Jace Corwin, he was only 16. My sister was 14. The words were flat, stripped of emotion, but his jaw tightened. "Soldiers came to our summer camp 2 winters ago," Tharek went on. "They said we stole horses. We had only our own. They shot her when she ran to save her pony. 14 winters." The fire crackled between them. For the first time, Viraya truly saw him. Not as her captor, not as some figure shaped by fear and rumor, but as a man carrying grief like a scar beneath the skin. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry changes nothing." "No," she said, "but I am still sorry." Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. Then Tharek spoke again. "You had a man in the east." She startled. "How did you—" "You speak his name when you sleep." Her face warmed. "Ren Aldor," she admitted. "He was— It doesn't matter now. My father found out. I was being sent to marry another." "Was," she added with a bitter laugh. "I suppose that problem solved itself." "You loved this Ren Aldor?" The bluntness of the question caught her off guard. Proper women didn't speak of such things, certainly not with strange men, but nothing about her life felt proper anymore. "Yes," she said, "but he was beneath my station, a carpenter's apprentice. My father said I shamed our family." Tharek made a sound that might have been contempt. "White people's shame," he said. "You find shame in love, but none in stealing land, breaking treaties." The words stung because they were true. Viraya found herself telling him more, about her mother, Edris Knox, about the suffocating rules of Boston society, about the marriage awaiting her with Sylvan Cross, a man she had never met. Tharek listened. Sometimes he asked questions, quiet ones, that showed he understood more than she had expected. "This," he said suddenly, gesturing toward the locket at her throat, the one thing she had been allowed to keep. "It matters. It was my mother's." Viraya touched it without thinking. "She died when I was 12. Consumption. It's all I have left of her." Something shifted in his expression. Loss answering loss. As the days passed, their evening conversation stretched longer. Tharek's English grew smoother, or perhaps he had always known more than he let on. He spoke of Apache life before the white advance, of buffalo hunts, of traditions both foreign and compelling. "We were many once," he said one night, staring into the fire. "Now we are few. Your people's sickness, your people's guns. Soon, maybe we are only memory." "There must be another way," Viraya said softly. "Peace." He looked at her with something close to pity. "Your people want one thing," he said, "for us to stop being who we are, to become farmers, Christians, white men with red skin." "That is not peace," he finished. "That is a different kind of death." Viraya wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. She had read the newspapers. She knew about children taken from their families, forced into schools meant to erase them. Killing the Indian to save the man. The fire burned low as the truth settled between them. One newspaper back east might have called it progress. One evening, nearly 2 weeks into her captivity, Sile brought Virea Knox to help with the communal cooking. The other women watched with guarded patience as Virea struggled with unfamiliar tools, her movements awkward and uncertain. When she burned her hand on a heated stone and bit back a sharp, very unladylike curse, one of the women laughed. Then another joined in. Soon they were teaching her, guiding her hands with their own, their voices blending Apache words with gestures. At first she learned simple things, water, fire, food, but gradually she began to understand deeper truths. A mother's gaze toward her child carried the same meaning in any language. Women laughed the same way when work was shared. And grief. Grief always settled in the shoulders, no matter the people. "You did this on purpose," Virea said to Tharek that night. "You made them see me as human." "I made you see us as human," he corrected calmly. "White women are told what to think," he went on. "What to feel. Here, you learn who you are." The realization struck her like cold air in her lungs. For the first time in her life, no one cared about her posture or her manners. No one measured her worth by how quietly she spoke or how gracefully she sat. The women judged her by her effort, her willingness to help, not by bloodlines or refinement. One night, a sound woke her. Singing, but nothing like any song she had ever heard. It was deep and mournful and achingly beautiful. She stepped out of the lodge to find the camp gathered around a large fire. "Someone had died," Sale explained softly later. "An elder, taken at last by the brutal winter. The singing was grief made sound, love given breath." Virea watched Tharek during the ceremony. Firelight carved his features into something solemn and distant as he sang with the others, his voice rising from the earth itself. This is what they want to destroy, she thought. Not bodies alone, but this connection to land, to one another, to something deeper than ownership and profit. "Your world is ending," she said to him later, surprising herself with the boldness of it. "Isn't it?" He didn't deny it. "Yes," he said quietly. "But we still sing, still dance, still love, until our last breath. We are Apache." The storm showed no mercy. If anything, it worsened. Snow piled so high it nearly sealed the lodge entrance. Virea had been captive for 3 weeks, maybe longer. She had lost track. Her old life felt distant now. Boston's gas lamps and polite parlor chatter about the weather seemed like memories from another existence. And Tharek had become something she could not define. Not a friend. The divide between them was too deep for that. But not an enemy either. He was her captor who ensured her safety, her guard who had shown her freedom. The contradiction kept her awake at night, listening for his footsteps outside the lodge. The awareness came slowly, like frost creeping across glass. Silent, inevitable, impossible to ignore. She noticed it first in small ways. How her breath caught when Tharek entered the lodge. How her eyes searched for him during the communal gatherings she was now allowed to attend. How the space between them during their evening talks seemed to narrow with each passing night. She told herself it was gratitude. He had saved her life, protected her from those who wanted her dead. But gratitude didn't explain the flush in her skin when his hand brushed hers while tending the fire. It didn't account for the dreams that left her restless and ashamed before dawn. For his part, Tharek had grown quieter as the weeks passed. But his silences were different now. Where they had once been walls, They felt like held breaths. His gaze lingered when he thought she wasn't watching. Once, she woke to find him reaching toward her as she slept, his hand hovering inches from her face before he pulled back and left the lodge abruptly. The tension shattered one night when Viraya woke screaming. She was back in the wagon. This time, the arrows struck her. This time, Tharek's eyes were cold as he raised his rifle. This time, mercy never came. She bolted upright, gasping in the darkness. The fire had burned down to embers, and cold pressed in from every side. Then warmth surrounded her. Arms, solid, real, pulled her against a chest that smelled of smoke and cedar. Tharek's voice rumbled near her ear. "Only a dream. You are safe." She should have pulled away. Every rule of propriety, every lesson of her upbringing demanded it. Instead, she turned into his embrace. Her hands clutched his shirt as sobs tore free. She cried for Jace Corwin, for the men who had died, for the life she had lost, for the life before her that could never truly be hers. Tharek held her through it all. One hand moved through her hair with a gentleness that broke something open inside her. He murmured words in Apache she didn't understand, but they soothed her all the same. Her sobs faded. Yet neither of them moved to break the embrace. "I dreamed, too," he said at last, his voice barely above the crackle of dying embers, "of my sister, of battles, of wide land left empty where buffalo once moved like waves across the plains." Viraya lifted her head to look at Tharek. In the low firelight, his face was carved from shadow and sharp angles, but his eyes carried a sorrow that mirrored her own. "How do you live with it?" she whispered. "The same way you do," he answered quietly. "One breath, one heartbeat, one day." His hand rose without thought, cupping her face. His thumb brushed away a tear before she realized it had fallen. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Viraya knew she should pull back. She knew this was dangerous ground, but his hand was warm against her cheek, and something in his gaze made her pulse race. "Tharek," she breathed, unsure whether it was a warning or an invitation. He released her at once, rising in one smooth motion. "Sleep," he said roughly. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Then he was gone. Cold and confusion rushed in where he had been. Viraya lay back against the buffalo robes, her skin still humming from his touch, her thoughts tumbling over themselves. What was happening to her? She was engaged, or had been. She was his captive. By every rule she had been raised with, this was wrong. Yet her world had narrowed to this lodge, this camp, these people who were meant to be her enemies, people who had shown her a truer humanity than Boston society ever had. And at the center of it all stood Tharek, who looked at her as though she were both precious and dangerous. The days that followed were agony. Tharek still brought her food, still checked the fire, still ensured she lacked nothing. But he kept his distance. Their evening conversations vanished. He stayed only long enough to do what was necessary, then left. The silence hurt more than Viraya wanted to admit. "You angered him?" Sile asked one afternoon as they worked side by side preparing dried meat for storage. "I don't know," Viraya said softly. "Maybe." Sile studied her with eyes that understood too much. "Tharek is good man, strong warrior, but he carries heavy pain," she said. "You make him feel things he believes he cannot feel." Heat rose in Viraya's cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," Sile replied gently, though sadness edged her smile. "This feeling is not good. Your people and ours are like oil and water. No mixing. Viraya knew she was right, even if she were returned safely, even if the impossible happened and she chose to stay. What future could exist? The world would never allow it. Both their peoples would see it as betrayal, but knowing and feeling were not the same, and her feelings deepened with every passing day. She found herself watching for him, something inside her brightening when she glimpsed him tending horses or guiding young boys as they learned to loose arrows. He was patient with children, gentle with elders, respected by the warriors, nothing like the savage she had been taught to fear. One evening, unable to endure the distance any longer, she confronted him when he brought her meal. "Have I offended you?" she asked before he could turn away. He stopped at the lodge entrance. "No." "Then why do you avoid me? We used to talk." "Talking is dangerous." He turned, and turmoil flickered across his face. "You see too much." "I see too much. Better you remember, you are captive." "I am captive," she repeated. "Is that all I am to you now? Goods for trade?" Something ignited in his expression. In 2 strides, he crossed the lodge and dropped to his knees before her. "You know what you are," he said harshly. "You know what I fight every time I look at you." Her heart pounded. "Then tell me." "No." "Tell me," she insisted, reaching up to touch his face as he had touched hers. He caught her wrist. His grip was firm but not cruel. "You are an engaged woman," he said. "I am a man who killed your people. There is nothing to say." "My engagement died with that convoy," she replied, "and you saved me when you could have let me die." She turned her hand within his grasp, threading their fingers together. "That tells me everything." For a heartbeat, she thought he would pull away. Instead, something like surrender crossed his eyes. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her palm, a kiss that sent fire racing through her veins. "Viraya," he said. Her name sounded like both prayer and curse. She leaned toward him, drawn by something stronger than reason or restraint. Their foreheads touched. Breath mingled between them. She felt herself standing on an edge, one heartbeat from falling. A shout outside shattered the moment. Tharek was on his feet instantly, warrior instincts cutting through everything else. More shouts followed, sharp and urgent. Viraya heard it instantly, the sharp edge of alarm in the voices outside. "Stay here," Tharek ordered. Then he was gone, slipping out of the lodge without another word. Viraya waited, counting heartbeats in the dark. Then she followed. Outside, warriors were already gathering, their movements quick and purposeful, faces drawn tight with urgency. Someone had sighted cavalry scouts along the ridge. The spring thaw had begun, quietly, dangerously, and she hadn't even noticed. Her thoughts had been trapped in storms of another kind. "They are searching for you," Tharek said when he returned. "We must move the camp." "Will they find us?" she asked. "Not if we move fast," he replied. "Into the sacred hills. The army does not follow there." As preparations began, the weight of his words settled over her. This meant farther from any chance of rescue, farther from ransom, deeper into Apache land, another step away from the life she had once known. Yet as she helped Sael dismantle the lodge, as she watched the camp move with practiced precision, each person knowing their role, she wondered if she even wanted to go back. What waited for her beyond these hills? Scandal, certainly. A forced marriage to preserve appearances. Whether Sylvan Cross would still claim her. A lifetime spent pretending these weeks had never happened. Pretending she hadn't learned these truths, hadn't felt these things, hadn't fallen in love with a man she had been taught to fear. The realization stole her breath, but it was there, clear and undeniable as sunrise. She loved Tharek, loved his strength and his restraint, his sorrow and his pride, loved the way he saw her, not as a Boston daughter, not as a ruined woman, but simply as Viraya. It was impossible. It was forbidden. It was true. When it was time to leave, Tharek came for her. His face bore travel paint, markings meant for danger and long roads ahead. In that moment she saw the warrior he was, and the man who had held her through nightmares, who had kissed her palm as though she were something sacred. "You ride with me," he said, and despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, her heart lifted. The journey would take them deeper into his world and farther from her own. As he lifted her onto the horse and settled behind her, his arms closing around her to take the reins, Viraya knew she was already lost. Not to captivity, but to something far more dangerous. A love that could never be spoken, never fulfilled, yet burned in her chest like a second heart. The new camp lay hidden in a deep valley among the sacred hills, sheltered by towering pines and fed by a stream that ran clear even in winter. It had taken 3 days to reach it, and with every mile the outside world seemed to fade. Surrounded by mountains that scraped the sky, she could almost believe they were the last people left on Earth. 17 nights had passed since they fled the old camp. 17 nights sleeping in Tharek's lodge, of careful distance, of conversations that circled what neither dared name. The tension had grown into something alive, electric and dangerous. On the 18th night, nature itself turned against them. Another blizzard came in, fiercer than any before. Ignoring Tharek's warnings, Viraya went out to gather firewood. She had grown confident in these weeks. Too confident. The storm struck without mercy. The world vanished in seconds. She stumbled, fell, the cold slicing through her clothes with terrifying speed. The camp disappeared as if it had never existed. Lost in a white void, Viraya finally understood how quickly this land could kill. Then hands found her. Strong, unyielding. Tharek emerged from the storm like something born of it, his face tight with fear and fury. Without a word, he lifted her and carried her through the blinding snow as though she weighed nothing. Back inside the lodge, he was not gentle. "Foolish woman," he snapped, as he stripped away her soaked outer clothes, wrapping her in thick buffalo robes. "You could have died." Her teeth chattered too hard to answer. Her hands and feet were numb. She couldn't stop shaking. Tharek fed the fire until it roared. Then he did something that would have scandalized Boston beyond redemption. He stripped down to his leggings and pulled her against his bare chest beneath the robes, sharing his body heat. "Don't," she managed, even as she clung to his warmth. "You die from pride," he muttered. "Be still." His arms tightened around her. "Get warm." Slowly, achingly, feeling crept back into her fingers and toes. With it came a sharp awareness of where she was. Her back rested against Tharek's chest. His arms were wrapped around her waist. Only thin layers of cloth separated skin from skin. As warmth returned to her body, another kind of heat followed. Unfamiliar, unsettling, undeniable. "Better," he murmured, his voice low against her ear. "Yes," Viraya whispered, though better was not the right word. She felt alive, unsteady, as if something inside her was unraveling. She knew she should move away. The danger had passed. The storm no longer threatened her life. Yet neither of them shifted. She felt his breathing change, felt the tension coil in him, mirroring her own. "Viraya." Her name on his lips was both warning and plea. She turned within his arms, needing to see his face. What she found there stole the last of her breath. Desire? Yes, but also tenderness, and fear, and wonder. His hand lifted, tracing the line of her cheek. She leaned into the touch before she could stop herself. "This is not wise," he said quietly. "I know. Your people are not here." She placed her hand over his heart, feeling how fast it beat beneath her palm. "No one is here but us." He said her name again, softer this time, but whatever words he might have found dissolved as she pressed her lips to his. The kiss felt like arriving somewhere she had always been meant to stand. His mouth was gentle at first, almost reverent, as if he feared she might break. Then she made a small, involuntary sound, and restraint slipped away. He shifted them so she lay beneath him, his weight grounding and sure. The kiss deepened, no longer tentative, no longer cautious. She had been kissed before, sweet, hurried kisses with Ren Aldor that once felt daring. But those belonged to another lifetime. Tharek kissed like a man who knew exactly what he wanted, and who had fought himself for far too long. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "Tell me no," he said roughly. Instead, Virea drew him back down. "Let me feel you once," she whispered, the words surprising even herself. "Just once, before this ends, before I am sent away. Let me know what it is to be truly held." Something in his expression broke. With a sound that might have been surrender, he kissed her again. His hands, once so careful, so restrained, became purposeful, learning, reverent. Virea arched beneath his touch, all thoughts of who she had been burning away. He treated her like something precious, something to be remembered. When she reached to learn him in return, he caught her hands. "Tonight is for you," he said, his voice tight with control. "Let me give you this." And he did. With patience and an intimacy that felt almost sacred, he showed her what her body could hold, what could exist between two people who truly saw one another. When she finally came apart in his arms, it was with his name on her lips and tears on her face. Afterward, they lay entwined, the storm still raging beyond the lodge, unable to reach the warmth they had made. Virea traced slow patterns across his chest, marveling at the freedom of touching him. "I love you," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. His arms tightened around her. "Do not say this." "Why?" she asked softly. "Because it cannot last? Because it is impossible? I know all of that. But it is still true." He lifted her face in his hands, brushing away tears she hadn't known were falling. "My heart knew you before my eyes ever did," he said quietly. "In dreams, I knew your face." "Then we have tonight," she whispered. They came together again, this time without hesitation, without restraint. Virea gave herself fully, holding nothing back, and felt him do the same. For this one night, nothing else existed. It was both fierce and gentle, possession and goodbye folded into the same breath. Virea memorized everything. The way Tharek spoke her name as if it carried weight, the salt of his skin, the reverence in his hands even when desire burned hottest. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they slept wrapped together like climbing vines. She woke once in the night to find him watching her. The pain and love in his expression stopped her heart. "What is it?" she whispered. "Remembering," he said simply. "For the nights after." Morning came like judgment. Pale light slid through the smoke hole, finding them still entwined. With daylight came reality, heavy, relentless. They dressed without speaking, the weight of what they had done settling between them. The storm had broken. Outside, the world glittered with cruel beauty, ice crusting every surface. Clear weather meant movement. Either the camp would shift again, or scouts would find them. Either way, their stolen time was ending. "I cannot keep you," Tharek said at last, his back to her as he fed the fire. "Spring comes. Your people search. To keep you is to bring war upon mine." "I know," she answered, the word scraping her throat raw. He turned to her, anguish plain. "I cannot make myself ready to let you go." She went to him, taking his hands. "Then don't. Let me stay. I'll learn. Your ways, your language." "You would be neither," he said gently. "Neither white nor Apache. No place with either people. Always between." He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I cannot do this to you." She wanted to argue, to say she didn't care, that exile was worth him. But even as the words formed, she knew he was right. She had seen the looks some still gave her in the camp. And her own people would see her as worse than ruined. They would call her traitor. "How long?" she asked instead. "How long before—" "Days, maybe a week. The snow melts fast now." 7 days, to store a lifetime of moments. It would have to be enough. They spent the next day pretending at normalcy, but the camp felt the change. Sile looked at Virea with knowing sadness. Elders watched Tharek with quiet disappointment. Everyone saw what had bloomed between captive and captor, and everyone knew how it must end. On the third night after the storm, lying together in the hush that followed love, Virea asked him about the future. "What will you do when I'm gone?" His hand stilled where it had been stroking her hair. "Fight until fighting ends. There is no after for warriors when the war is over. The war is already lost." He drew her closer. "But I will remember. Always. The woman who saw me true." She buried her face against his chest, breathing him in, trying to brand him into memory. Somewhere beyond these hills, her old world waited to reclaim her. But here, now, in this lodge that smelled of smoke and cedar and them, she was exactly where she belonged. Even if belonging could only last a handful of stolen nights. The cruel truth was that love was not enough. Not to bridge their worlds, not to stop what was coming, not to make the impossible possible. For these remaining days, Virea decided love would be everything. It would have to sustain her for whatever came after. The riders appeared on the ridge at dawn. Blue uniforms cut dark against the melting snow. Virea saw them first, standing by the stream filling waterskins for the morning meal. Her heart seized. The vessels slipped from numb fingers. They had been found. The camp erupted into controlled chaos. Warriors seized weapons. Women gathered children. Movements were swift, practiced. People who had fled before and would flee again. But there was nowhere left to run. The soldiers had positioned themselves to seal every exit from the valley. Virea found Tharek among the warriors, his face painted for battle. His face was carved from stone. When he saw Virea, something broke through the hardness. Pain, resignation, love, before the warrior mask slammed back into place. "Stay in the lodge," Tharek ordered. His voice gave nothing away of the man who had held her through the night, who had whispered Apache words against her skin. "Go." The command allowed no argument. Virea retreated to the lodge but could not make herself hide. Through the flap, she watched a small group of soldiers ride into camp beneath a white flag. A parley, then. Not an attack. Not yet. The lead officer dismounted, his posture rigid with career discipline. She recognized the type instantly. Indian fighter, hardened by years of frontier campaigns. He spoke with Yarek, while Tharek and the Ash Ridge 5 formed a loose ring nearby. Weapons were visible, hands close, but nothing raised. Then the officer's voice carried across the camp, sharp and unmistakable. We know you have the white woman, Viraya Knox. Return her, and we leave in peace. Her legs nearly gave out. Of course they knew her name. The Knox family had money, influence. Corlin Knox would never accept her disappearance, not when it stained the family honor so publicly. Yarek answered in Apache, his voice steady and dignified. The words were passed through a mixed-blood interpreter. The woman is not a prisoner. She remains by her own will. The officer laughed, harsh and contemptuous. No white woman stays with savages by choice. His tone hardened. You have 1 hour to produce her. After that, we take her by force. The camp shifted. Hands tightened on rifle stocks and bowstrings. Violence hovered, balanced on a blade's edge. And Viraya understood with terrible clarity. If blood spilled, people would die. Tharek would die defending this place that had become her home. Sael might die. The children she had watched laugh in the snow would die, all because of her. Before courage could fail her, she stepped from the lodge. She crossed the camp with her head high. Every gaze turned toward her, soldier and Apache alike. She felt Tharek's stare like a hand on her back, but did not look at him. If she did, she would break. I am Viraya Knox, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. I am unharmed. Relief flashed across the officer's face. Miss Knox, thank God. Your family has been frantic. Come, we'll take you somewhere safe. Safe. The word tasted like ash. She moved forward anyway. Each step felt like tearing herself in half. She told herself she was doing this for them, for Tharek, for Sael, for the Sunscar kin. Wait. Tharek's voice cut through the morning air. He strode forward, ignoring the rifles raised instinctively toward him. His eyes never left her face. You go by choice? The question carried everything unspoken. He was giving her an opening. If she said no, if she claimed she wished to stay, he and his warriors would fight. They would likely die, but they would fight. Viraya finally met his gaze and poured everything she could not say into that single look. Yes, she whispered. By choice. Something shattered in his expression before he forced it back into stone. He reached beneath his shirt and lifted a leather cord from around his neck. A small silver disc, one she had noticed but never asked about. He pressed it into her palm, his fingers lingering for a heartbeat too long. So you remember, he said in Apache, words the soldiers did not understand. But she did. Then he turned away. His back was straight. Every inch the warrior. He did not look back. The ride to the fort passed in fragments. The officers asked questions. Had she been harmed, mistreated, touched? Viraya answered none of them. She held the silver disc clenched in her fist until its edges cut into her skin. At Fort Harrison, she was handed over to Alda Whitlock, the medical officer's wife, whose kindness felt smothering and whose questions never ceased. Viraya was bathed, redressed in proper clothing that felt like a costume, examined by Dr. Fenric Lowe, who declared her remarkably well considering. You're very lucky, Alda said, brushing her hair too firmly. Those savages could have done unspeakable things. Your reputation may suffer, of course, but you're safe now. Safe. Sylvan Cross has indicated he is still willing to proceed with the marriage, Alda continued lightly, as if discussing damaged goods. Provided, of course, you're intact. Viraya said nothing. That night, lying alone in a proper bed for the first time in months, she closed her hand around the silver disc and wondered how something that felt so much like survival could feel so much like loss. Viraya finally unfolded Tharek's gift. It was a warrior's honor mark. The symbols were unmistakable now that she studied them closely. By giving it to her, He had claimed her under his protection, even in absence. Any Apache who saw it would know she had been deemed worthy of a warrior's regard. She pressed the silver disc to her lips at last and allowed the tears she had been holding back to fall. The journey to Mercy's Bend took 3 days. Viraya spoke only when addressed directly, and even then only when forced. She stared out the coach window, seeing nothing but memory. The officers escorting her exchanged worried glances, clearly wondering whether her ordeal had damaged her mind. If only they knew. Her mind was painfully clear. Every moment with Tharic was etched into her, his rare, crooked smiles, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name, the reverence in his hands. And beneath it all, a growing awareness she could not yet name, but felt pulsing quietly inside her, as if something had been carried away from the mountains and refused to be left behind. Mercy's Bend appeared like a wound in the land. Raw wooden buildings, mud-choked streets, the ugly sprawl of civilization clawing over what had once been open ground. Townspeople gathered as she arrived, their faces a mixture of curiosity and judgment. "That's her," someone whispered. "The Knox girl. Lived with savages. Probably ruined. No decent man will have her now." Sylvan Cross waited at the hotel. He was polite, proper, everything a gentleman should be, and utterly colorless beside the man she had left behind. He looked at Viraya as if she were a problem to be resolved, not a person to be known. "Miss Knox," he said carefully, "I'm pleased to see you returned safely. Perhaps we should discuss our arrangement." "There's nothing to discuss," Viraya said, surprised to find her voice steady. "I cannot marry you, Mr. Cross. I'm sorry for any inconvenience." His face flushed. "Now see here, your father assured me." "My father is not here," she said, suddenly exhausted. "I've been through an ordeal, as everyone keeps reminding me. Surely you understand I need time before making decisions about my future." It was a reprieve, not a solution. Still, Cross accepted it with poor grace and left muttering about agreements and reputation. Viraya was left blessedly alone. But being alone in Mercy's Bend was nothing like being alone among the Apache. Here, solitude meant hostile stares, whispered speculation, an isolation that cut sharper than winter wind. Respectable women crossed the street to avoid her. Men watched her with open curiosity that made her skin crawl. Even the hotel staff treated her as if she might contaminate the place. She rented a small room above the general store, paying with money wired from Corlin Knox, along with a letter demanding she return east immediately. She ignored the letter, stretching the funds as far as she could. Days passed in a haze of grief and growing certainty. Sometimes she stood at her window, looking toward the mountains where Tharic lived, wondering if he thought of her. If he knew what they had created in those stolen nights. If he understood why she had left, why she had chosen his people over her own heart. The silver disc never left her neck, hidden beneath proper collars and modest dresses. It was her secret, her talisman, proof that the past had been real. Spring turned to summer, and with it came truth she could no longer deny. Her body began to change. The life inside her, Tharic's child, their child, grew stronger each day. She should have been terrified. An unmarried woman carrying a mixed-blood child would be utterly cast out. Yet when Viraya placed her hand over her still flat belly, all she felt was fierce love. This child was all she had left of him, and she would protect it with her life. Mercy's Bend would never accept her once the truth became known. Boston was impossible. Somewhere beyond the hills, Tharic lived on, unaware he would be a father, unaware their impossible love had become something permanent. Viraya touched the silver disc at her throat and made a decision. She would not bring shame upon this child, She would not apologize for love. She would find a way to survive, to raise their baby somewhere it could be free, even if she had to do it alone. By autumn, she could no longer hide her condition. Dresses were let out as far as they would go. Shawls were worn even in warm weather. Still, the curve of her belly became undeniable. Whispers hardened into open hostility. "Shameless," Malin Rook hissed to her daughter as they passed on the street. "Carrying a savage's bastard and walking like she belongs among decent folk." Viraya kept walking, her hand resting protectively over her child. She had already lost everything that could be taken from her. The hotel told her she could no longer stay. The general store cut off her credit. Even the church turned her away when she asked for simple Christian charity, the minister informing her that she had chosen her path among heathens and must now endure its consequences. Viraya moved into an abandoned trapper's cabin on the edge of town, paying the last of her money to a landlord who made it clear this kindness was one he would soon regret. The cabin was little more than a shack. Gaps in the walls, a roof that leaked, a hearth that smoked more than it warmed. But it was shelter, and she was grateful for that much. She took in washing to earn a few coins, though even that proved difficult. Most townsfolk would not trust her with their clothes. Iskra Delos, the widow who ran the boarding house, was one of the few who showed her mercy, bringing food when she could, and standing between Viraya and the worst of the gossip. "They've no right to judge," Iskra said one evening, watching Viraya work despite swollen ankles and a back stiff with pain. "Half the men in this town keep Apache women on the side when their wives aren't looking. The difference is, you were seen." Winter came early and hard, as if the land itself had turned against her. Viraya's pregnancy advanced, making every task heavier. Hauling water left her breathless. Gathering firewood became agony. Some nights she lay on her thin mattress, feeling the child stir inside her, wondering if she would live long enough to see him born. On one such night, with December wind screaming through the cabin and her woodpile nearly gone, the pain began. Too soon, she thought desperately. The child was not due for weeks, but her body refused to listen. Contractions seized her without mercy, dropping her to her knees. She crawled to the door, thinking to call for help. But who would come? Mercy's bend had made its judgment clear. She was alone, as she had chosen to be to protect Tharek and his people. Now that choice might cost her and the child their lives. Labor was agony beyond words. Hours blurred together in pain and terror. Viraya bit down on a leather strap to keep from screaming, instinct telling her that weakness here could be fatal. Between contractions, she prepared as best she could. Boiling water, laying out the few clean cloths she owned, praying to any god who might hear, an outcast woman. At dawn, pale light crept through frost-glazed windows as the final urge came, driven by desperation. With strength born of survival, Viraya delivered her child onto the blankets she had laid out. She cut the cord with shaking hands. A son. Perfect, despite his early arrival. Dark wisps of hair. And when his eyes finally opened, they were Tharek's eyes looking back at her. Viraya pressed him to her chest, sobbing with exhaustion and relief, and a love so fierce it frightened her. She wrapped Irene in a blanket and forced herself to her feet, opening the door, and found an ancient Apache woman standing there, bent with age but with eyes full of quiet kindness. "I am Orenai," the woman said in accented English. "I dreamed of you, of a child born between worlds. You need help." Too exhausted to question fate, Viraya let Orenai guide her and the baby to a small wagon. They traveled only a short distance, to the far side of the ridge where a tiny cabin stood beside a hot spring. Steam rose into the winter air, the warmth creating green grass amid snow. Hope made visible. Orenai tended to Viraya with practiced hands, washing her and the child, brewing teas to ease the pain that followed birth. She examined Irene carefully and declared him strong, despite coming early. "Why?" Virea asked when she could finally speak. "Why help me?" Orenai's eyes were knowing. "I see the honor mark you wear. Tharek's protection reaches farther than you know, to those who understand its meaning." She brushed Iren's cheek gently. "This child carries two bloods. He will need both to survive what is coming." Under Orenai's care, Virea slowly healed. The old woman taught her what the Apache women in camp had never had time to: how to wrap Iren properly, how to read his different cries, remedies for common childhood sickness. It felt like having a grandmother, something Virea had never known. "You cannot stay here forever," Orenai said one evening as they sat by the fire, Iren sleeping in his cradleboard. "The town will come searching. You must have a plan." Virea nodded. She had already heard riders passing nearby, seen smoke from new cabins creeping closer as settlers pressed deeper into Apache land. This refuge was temporary. "There is nowhere for us," she said quietly. "No place where a woman like me and a child like him can live in peace." "West," Orenai said firmly. "California, Oregon, places where the past weighs less than the present, where mixed-blood children are common, where a woman may begin again, if she is strong." "I have no money," Virea whispered. "No way to travel so far with an infant." Orenai smiled, the lines of her weathered face softening. "My family owes a debt to Tharek's kin from many seasons past. I repay it by helping you. When the snow melts, a trader comes through, my nephew's wife's brother. He carries goods to Oregon territory. You go with him." Hope, dangerous, long buried, stirred in Virea's chest. "Does Tharek know?" she asked, gesturing to Iren. Orenai's expression grew sad. "He believes you safe among your people." Virea closed her hand around the silver disk at her throat, holding her son close, knowing that the road ahead would be long and that survival would demand everything she had left. "He believes he did the right thing by letting you go. The soldiers keep a close eye on him. If he knew about the child—" She shook her head. "He would come," Virea said quietly, "and they would kill him." She understood now. Tharek had given up his heart to keep her alive, and she had given up hers to keep him breathing. Now she would sacrifice even the chance of him knowing his son, because love, real love, demanded it. Spring arrived slowly, but it arrived, and with it came Kaim, just as Orenai had promised. He was a reserved man, steady-eyed, who asked no questions about the white woman traveling with a mixed-blood infant. He simply cleared space in his supply wagon and told her to be ready at first light. Saying goodbye to Orenai was harder than Virea had expected. In those months, the old woman had become family, the only soul who looked at Iren with affection instead of judgment. "You teach him both ways," Orenai told her, pressing a small leather pouch into her hands. "His father's strength, his mother's learning. He will need both. Inside were things Virea recognized at once: sage, sweetgrass, a small carved bear, and something impossible. A photograph, her mother's picture, the one lost during the attack on the convoy. "How?" Virea whispered. "Tharek kept it," Orenai said simply, "to remember you. Now it belongs to his son." Virea clutched the pouch, tears spilling freely. Even in absence, Tharek was still protecting them. Through bonds of kinship and honor, she was only beginning to understand. The journey west took 2 months. Kaim was kind in his quiet way, teaching her to handle the oxen when he grew tired, pointing out edible plants when supplies ran thin. Despite the hardship, Irene thrived, round and alert, his dark eyes absorbing the world with the same fierce intensity as his father's. They parted at Fort Boise, Chaim turning back for another supply run, Virea joining a wagon train bound for the Willamette Valley. She told the wagon master she was a widow, her husband taken by fever. If anyone noticed her child's mixed blood, the frontier cared far less than Mercy's Bend ever had. She reached Portland as summer faded toward autumn. Irene was 6 months old now, babbling in sounds that could have been English or Apache. The city was raw and unfinished, full of noise and ambition, too busy building itself to ask questions about her past. She found work in a boarding house run by a German couple who needed someone to cook and clean. They gave her a small attic room and asked nothing about her husband or her child's father. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. That first night, as she laid Irene down to sleep, Virea touched the silver disc hidden at her throat and whispered into the dark, hoping her words might somehow reach the mountains. "We're safe, my love. Our son is strong and beautiful, and I will make sure he knows his father was the best man I ever knew, even if he never meets you." Far to the east, beyond plains and ridges and the invisible line between their worlds, Tharek lived on. And here, in a narrow attic room, Virea began building a life between worlds, for a child of two peoples, born of a love the world had tried to erase. The truth reached Tharek through trading routes, passed quietly from one Apache camp to another, like smoke drifting across distance. A white woman in Oregon Territory, living alone, with a half-Apache child. A woman who wore a warrior's honor mark on a chain at her throat. He was tracking elk in the high country when his cousin found him, breathless from the hard ride. "She lives," the word spilled out. "Not with her people. She bore a child. Your child." Tharek stood frozen as the truth struck him like an avalanche. A son. She had carried his son through exile and hunger and judgment. Alone. And he had let her go, believing it was the honorable choice. "How long?" His voice was rough, broken. 7 moons, maybe 8. 7 months his son had lived without his father's name, without his protection, and Virea, brave, impossible Virea, had endured it all alone. "The soldiers still watch you," his cousin warned. "They think you will try to find her. It could be a trap." Tharek did not care. Honor meant nothing if it abandoned the woman he loved, and their child to a world that despised them both. He left that night with only his horse, his weapons, and the memories that had kept him breathing through the long separation. The journey west was dangerous. Army patrols still marked him a renegade. But nothing would stop him now. He rode for 3 hard weeks, traveling at night, hiding by day, slipping past cavalry and suspicious settlers. He cut his hair shorter, traded his traditional dress for the rough clothes of a mixed-blood trader. It hurt to hide who he was, but it would hurt more to die before reaching them. Portland spread before him like another world. Raw timber, mud streets, the smell of sawdust and ambition thick in the air. Finding one woman in such a place felt impossible. Then he remembered. She would still wear his mark. Someone would have noticed. After 2 days of careful questions in the native quarter, an old woman selling beadwork nodded slowly. "The white woman with the warrior's token?" she said. "Yes, I have seen her." "She works at the German boarding house on 3rd Street, the woman said. "Keeps to herself. But I saw the honor mark when she bent to lift her baby. Not many white women wear something like that." That was all Tharek needed. He found the boarding house as dusk settled over Portland, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break his ribs. Through a lamplit window, he saw her, Virea, thinner than he remembered, but unmistakably herself, standing at the stove, stirring a pot. Nearby, in a woven basket, a baby played with wooden blocks, dark-haired and perfect. His son. He must have made a sound because Virea looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. Shock, joy, fear, love, all of it crossed her face in a single breath. She glanced around quickly, then lifted one hand and pointed towards the back. They met in the small garden behind the house, Viraya carrying Irene in her arms. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They only stared, drinking each other in after so many months apart. Then Tharek reached out, hands trembling, and touched his son's cheek. "Irene," Viraya whispered. The child studied him with solemn, dark eyes so like his own it nearly stopped Tharek's breath. Then Irene smiled, reached out, and tangled his fingers in his father's hair. In that instant, Tharek felt his heart break open and reform into something stronger. "How?" Viraya whispered. "How did you find us?" "Word travels," he said softly. "Even across mountains. Did you think I would not come once I knew?" "I hoped you would never know," she admitted. "For your safety. The soldiers mean nothing." He cupped her face, brushing away the tears that had begun to fall. "You left to protect me. But without you, Viraya, I was already dead." She made a broken sound and leaned into him, closing the circle of three with their son between them. Tharek breathed in the familiar scent of her hair and felt the tightness in his chest ease for the first time since watching her ride away. "We can't stay here," Viraya said against his shoulder. "The owners are kind, but if someone recognizes you, if word reaches the army, I know." He pulled back, meeting her eyes. "Come with me." Her breath caught. "Where?" "North, Canada, beyond the army's reach. The peoples there are not at war. We can live." "Together?" She tested the word like it might vanish if spoken too loudly. He saw hope bloom in her face. "Is it truly possible?" "Nothing is impossible now." He touched Irene's cheek again, marveling at the softness. "I have found you. I have found him. The rest, we face together." It took Viraya 3 days to prepare. She gave notice at the boarding house, claiming a family emergency back east. The German couple seemed genuinely sorry to see her go, but they didn't pry. Viraya had learned to treasure kind people who asked no questions. Tharek spent those days gathering supplies and planning their route. The direct path ran through army patrols, but a longer way through the coastal mountains would offer cover. He traded his horse for a sturdy wagon and team, knowing Viraya and the baby could never manage such a journey on horseback. They left Portland before dawn, beneath a thick blanket of fog, as if the land itself wished to hide their escape. Viraya packed little. Clothes Orenai had helped her sew for Irene, her mother's photograph, a small pouch of savings. Everything else she abandoned without regret as the city faded behind them. It felt like shedding an old skin, the months of shame, of hiding, of pretending to be widowed. All of it fell away. Beside her sat the man she loved, no longer a memory but solid and real. In her arms, their son slept peacefully, unaware his world had just widened to include his father. "Tell me about the months I missed," Tharek said as the wagon rolled forward. "Tell me everything." So she did. She told him about the pregnancy, the cruelty of Mercy's Bend, the terrifying night of Irene's birth. She told him about Orenai's care, the long road west, the nights she whispered stories of his father into their son's dreams. "He knows you," she said, watching Tharek absorb every word. "I made sure of it, every night. I told him about the bravest man I ever knew." "Not brave," Tharek said roughly. "Foolish. I should have fought to keep you." "Then you would be dead," she replied quietly. "And Irene would have no father at all." She took his hand. "We both did what we believed was right. Now we have another chance. They traveled for weeks along old Apache trading paths and deer trails. Tharek taught her to read the land, to find water, to recognize safe plants, to move without leaving signs. Vireya learned quickly, driven by love and necessity. Irene thrived, delighting in his father's presence. Tharek carried him for hours, speaking Apache words softly, pointing out animal tracks, singing the old songs his own father had once sung. Watching them together, Vireya felt her heart swell until she feared it might burst. They faced hardship, suspicious settlers, dangerous river crossings, a week of relentless rain that turned the trails to mud. But they faced it together. They hid for 2 days while an army patrol moved through the nearby valley. Vireya held her breath, whispering prayers that Irene would not cry. He didn't. They endured in silence, sustained by the promise of a life where they could simply exist as a family. When they finally reached the border, it felt strangely ordinary. Just another river to ford, no different from dozens they had already crossed. Yet on the far bank waited a different world, a place where a mixed family might find acceptance, or at least be left alone. They settled near a trading post in British Columbia, a rough place where native trappers and white men had lived and intermarried for generations. Tharek found work breaking horses, his skill obvious to anyone who watched him handle a wild animal with calm authority. Vireya took in sewing, her Eastern schooling finally useful in a way that felt honest. Together they built a small cabin beside a clear stream. It was plain, nothing more than logs and a tight roof, but it was theirs. The first winter was brutal, as first winters always are. Still, curled together beneath heavy blankets with Irene between them, Vireya felt richer than she ever had in the finest homes of Boston. This was what she had been made for. Not parlors and polite conversations, not marriages arranged for advantage, but this man, this child, this life carved from wilderness and held together by love. "Do you regret it?" Tharek asked one night as snow drifted softly past the window. "Your old life. You could have had comfort, acceptance." Vireya turned in his arms to face him. "I had a cage," she said quietly. "You gave me the sky." He kissed her then, slow, deep, and tender, and she knew he understood. They had both surrendered their worlds for this. He, his place among his people. She, her place in society. Together they had built something entirely new, something that belonged only to them. When spring arrived, Vireya stood in the doorway, watching Tharek teach Irene to walk on unsteady legs. Their son carried his father's stubborn strength and his mother's determination, falling and rising again without tears. She touched the honor mark at her throat, no longer hidden, now worn openly. Let the world judge as it wished. She had chosen love over safety, truth over approval. That choice had led her here, to a cabin in the wilderness, to the man who had claimed her heart, and to the child who carried the best of both their worlds. It was not the life anyone had planned for her. It was infinitely better. 5 years passed in their hidden haven before the letter arrived. Vireya stared at the travel-worn envelope, recognizing the handwriting instantly. Valen Marr, her mother's sister. How her aunt had traced them to British Columbia was a mystery, but the message was clear enough. Corlin Knox was dead. There were legal matters that required Vireya's attention. "You don't have to go," Tharek said that evening as they spoke in low voices. Nearby, Irene, now a sturdy boy of 5, played with wooden horses his father had carved, unaware of the weight pressing in around him. "There's an inheritance," Vireya said softly. "Property in Boston, investments." "It could secure Irene's future," she continued. "Give him choices we can't offer here." They both understood the danger. Returning to American soil meant Tharek could be arrested, or worse. Vireya, An unmarried woman with a mixed-blood child would face her own judgments. Still, the thought of education, of opportunity, of a future that wasn't forever on the margins, was difficult to ignore. "We go together," Tharek said firmly. "Or not at all." She loved him even more for that. They chose to meet in Montana, at Fort Benton, far from Boston, yet still American territory where Verea could speak to lawyers and settle the estate. It was meant to be brief. A few days, nothing more. They hadn't planned on Sylvan Cross. He was waiting at the hotel when they arrived. Older now, his once bland features hardened by years on the frontier. "Mrs. Knox," he said, pointedly ignoring both her correction and Tharek's presence. "I heard you might be passing through." "Mr. Cross," Verea replied evenly. "I'm surprised to see you." "Are you?" His smile was thin and cold. "You caused me considerable embarrassment when you disappeared. My reputation suffered. Still, I'm prepared to be generous." She felt Tharek tense beside her, his hand drifting instinctively toward where his knife would rest. Verea touched his arm, both a warning and a promise. "I don't understand," she said carefully. "It's simple," Cross replied. "Your father's will has conditions. The inheritance passes to you only if you are respectably married. I remain willing to honor our original arrangement." His eyes flicked dismissively over Tharek and Irene. "Of course, you'll need to abandon these associations. The boy can be sent to one of those Indian schools. They'll civilize him." The words hung in the air like poison. Rage rose in Verea's chest, clean, clarifying, burning away any lingering doubt about the world she had left behind. "No," she said. Cross blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no," Verea repeated, her voice steady. "I would rather live in poverty for the rest of my life than surrender my family for your idea of respectability." His face flushed, fury tightening his jaw. "You'd choose this savage and his half-breed?" He never finished the sentence. Tharek moved faster than thought. His fist slammed into Sylvan Cross's jaw, dropping him hard to the hotel floor. Gasps rippled through the lobby as chairs scraped and people scattered. "We need to leave," Verea said urgently. "Now." They fled Fort Benton within the hour, but news travels fast on the frontier. By evening, a warrant was issued for Tharek's arrest on charges of assault. They pushed hard towards the border, knowing pursuit would follow. The confrontation came at dawn, 20 miles from safety. A small posse blocked the trail, led by a marshal who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They were surrounded before Tharek could react. "Come in peaceful," the marshal called. "End this easy. The man you struck wants justice, but nobody needs to die." Verea stepped forward before Tharek could answer. "Wait, please. Let me speak." The marshal hesitated, then nodded. "I know what we look like to you," Verea began, her voice carrying in the cold morning air. "A fallen woman, a savage, a child who doesn't fit your world. But I need you to see what's truly here." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small leather journal, the one she'd kept through all their years together. "May I approach?" At the marshal's cautious nod, she walked forward and placed the journal in his hands. "Read any page. See who we really are." He opened it at random. His eyes moved across Verea's careful script. His expression shifted as he read entries about teaching Irene his letters, about Tharek breaking wild horses with patience instead of force, about building a life together with grit and love. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this is well and good, but the law says a white woman can't love a native man," Verea cut in, her voice rising. "The law says our son should be taken from us because his blood is mixed. Then the law is wrong, and you know it." The posse shifted uneasily. These were frontier men. They'd seen mixed families survive by honesty and hard work. They knew reality didn't match speeches made back east. The marshal was silent for a long moment. Then he closed the journal. "Seems to me," he said carefully, "we lost their trail back at the river. Searched all day. Found nothing. They probably crossed into Canada by now." He handed the journal back. "Nothing more we can do on this side of the border." Verea's eyes filled. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," the marshal replied. "Just take care of that boy. World's hard enough without losing his folks." They rode hard until they crossed into safety. Only then did Verea allow herself to cry, over the inheritance lost, over the reminder of how cruel the world could be, but most of all with relief. They were together. They were free. That night, camped beside a mountain lake, Tharek surprised her. He knelt in the old way and offered a necklace of silver and turquoise. "Verea knocks," he said formally, "before the elders who know my people, before a frontier preacher who asks no questions. Will you be my wife?" She answered with tears and laughter both. At the small outpost, she signed the register not with the name she was born to, but the one her heart had carried all along. Verea Tharek's wife, claimed without shame. The years that followed weren't easy, but they were good. They turned their cabin into a true home, added a small barn, cleared ground for gardens. Irene grew strong and bright, learning both his parents' ways, tracking like an Apache child of the hills, reading with the focus of a scholar. When his sister Niel was born, golden-haired and fierce-eyed, he guarded her with the seriousness of a true older brother. Verea taught at the local school, bringing letters and numbers to native and mixed-blood children who might otherwise be forgotten. Tharek became known as the finest horse trainer for days' travel, men coming from far off to trust him with their most difficult stock. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Verea thought of the life she might have had. The Boston house, the polite dinners, the proper marriage. Then she would watch Tharek teaching their children to read the stars, or feel his arms around her in their simple bed, and she would know, down to her bones, that she had chosen right. One winter evening, snow fell softly outside while the children slept. Verea sat by candlelight, writing in her journal. Tharek watched her from the bed, his eyes warm with a love that had never dimmed. "What are you writing?" he asked. "Our story," she replied. "So our children will know how they came to be. So they'll understand that love doesn't always follow the paths others lay down." "And how does it end?" he asked gently. Verea smiled, set down her pen, and joined him beneath the blankets. "It doesn't end. It goes on, day by day, season by season. Two people who shouldn't have found each other, building a life everyone said was impossible." Tharek smiled back. "Sounds like a good story?" And it was. Tharek murmured as he gathered her clothes, careful and familiar. "The best," he said quietly. Verea smiled. "Always." She closed the journal on its final page. "I lost my reputation," she wrote, "my inheritance, and my place in the world I was born into. But I gained something worth far more. The freedom to love without conditions, to live without apology, to raise children who know they are perfect exactly as they are. That first night in the blizzard, I begged to feel him just once. I never imagined that once would become always, that a moment stolen from fate would turn into a lifetime of moments, each one precious beyond measure." She set down the pen, the ink still dark. "I am Verea Knox, wife of Tharek, mother of Irene and Niel, and I am exactly where I belong." She looked up at him, the firelight catching in her eyes, and felt the quiet certainty of a life chosen, not given. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Inside, the world was steady and whole. Thank you for listening to this story, she added softly, as if to the page itself, of forbidden love and unbreakable bonds in the Wild West. She closed the journal and rested it on the table. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for giving your time to this story. Some journeys shape us, and we hope this one left a mark on your heart. There are more paths ahead, more legends of love, hardship, and redemption beneath the western sky. Please subscribe, leave your thoughts, and travel with us once again. Thank you, and God bless. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. The stories presented here are creative expressions and may mix historical inspiration with dramatized scenes. AI tools contribute to some elements of voice, imagery, and structure, but every published story is refined by editors and creators to ensure authentic emotional impact. We honor YouTube's policies and do not generate deceptive likenesses or artificial depictions of real people. All audiovisual components are legally licensed. Any use, redistribution, or alteration of this content must be granted through written consent. Your presence here means a lot. Thank you for supporting artistic storytelling.